Good afternoon, everyone. Jenny LeRae here. Welcome to today's Research America Alliance member meeting with our esteemed guest, Steve Clemons. As usual, we've placed our audience members on mute, and you can type questions in our Q&A box at any time. My colleague Terry will ask them during the Q&A session. I'm so pleased to introduce Steve. I think many of you know him. He has been featured at a number of Research America events over the years. He's a veteran journalist, longtime observer of the Washington policy landscape, and he's currently the editor at large for The Hill. He's always full of great insights and some humor too, although no pressure, Steve, to be funny. But you're always good for a quip or two. You know, we are really eager to hear your thoughts on the big picture to start. You know, how do you describe the current political landscape right now as we, enter the 117th Congress and the new administration? Let's start there.
Well, Jenny, great to be with you. I love Research America. I love your members. They're diverse. I have benefited and had a great time every time I've had an encounter with you. And I believe so strongly that science is saving the nation. Science is saving the world right now. When we got together, I think for your annual meeting last year, and we saw this, and I said, it's going to take a crisis of some sort again, unfortunately, for people to understand that science is delivering for them. And so investment in it, which I believe so strongly in. And I'll just say before I answer your great question, I always ask myself in the atmosphere when I'm kind of thinking about the political scene in America, if Galileo were alive today, would he make it through the trial or not, unscathed? And I have to say that for the last 4 years, without any political bias, I think you can objectively say that while science was progressing at a breakneck speed and changing so many fronts simultaneously, Galileo would be found guilty. But I feel like there's been a shift in the atmosphere, in the change in who's running the show, and a different kind of respect and aura around science, which really matters, which we'll get into, I hope. And so I think Galileo might get off in this moment. So it's something that always in the back of my mind. But I think that the political landscape is bumpy. I think there are still, I don't want to be a cliche for everything everybody hears in the press, but I often think about my second and third cousins that I have connected to digitally. I don't know any of them personally, but I connect them through 23andMe, and I poll 100 of them on their attitudes now and then. And, 4 years ago, 90 out of 100 of that 100 that I got to agree to talk to me voted for Donald Trump. This time, 62 did. So it was a 28-point drop in support. He still had a majority among folks I'm blood related to, but it does show, at least in my unscientific poll out there, of a shift from people who are largely, Midwestern types who were dismayed by some of the things they saw. If you follow the polling, Mark Penn's polls, anybody's polls, but we follow Mark Penn pretty closely. Lysol Day, the day flirting around with the idea of disinfectants being able to clean us all out, was a kind of interesting transition in the credibility of President Trump, not only on COVID, but on his management. He never really quite recovered from that in some senses. So, but I think there are a lot of people who still feel that the Democratic Party and the current leadership don't fix their problems and don't fix their needs. They feel screwed over by the Washington system, by New York, by the financial community, by what they saw as globalization, and they don't know their pathway out. So they lay out there simmering and upset and not yet satisfied with what they've seen, even though I think Joe Biden has reached out to them. So my quick answer to you is it's bumpy and unstable. And there are different parts in this country where gravity is operating differently, where what people read and see and think and feel are very different from one another. And we ignore that at our peril. What I really like about Joe Biden is I did an interview with him in 2016 when Trump and Hillary Clinton were running against each other. And he said the challenge for the Democratic Party was that it had become a party of snobs. And we need to undo that. And I think Joe Biden is very committed to changing that sensibility that there is a divide between people based on income, on race, on geography, on education. And so he's really going to be working to de-snobberize, if you will, the perception of the Democratic Party. But I think they've got a real hard problem, hard challenge ahead, trying to basically continually communicate across the board to people.
That's great. Well, are you ready to have some You're going to have some questions thrown at you, Steve.
I love the questions from.
All right. Well, I'm gonna take a first stab.
Okay.
I really love what you said about the aura of science, and I want to get back to that, and I want to get back to some specific policy issues. But you know, a lot of what happens in DC is based on power, and so let's talk a little bit about how, to the extent to which power has shifted in DC since the election. So the House still remains in Democratic hands. Obviously, the White House has shifted. The Senate, talk to us about what it means to have a 50-50 Senate. Are we going to really see a difference in what comes out of the Senate in terms of policy, tone? Are we going to see more bipartisanship? We're hearing about a power sharing arrangement. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, I can briefly address it. You know, we were here before when Tom Daschle and Trent Lott were the leading Republicans and leading Democrats in the Senate. We had a 50-50 Senate, and you know, I think that at that moment they devised a plan, and this largely looks like that, where you have even membership on the committees, but the chair of the committee is Democrat, and the ability to set the agenda is in the Democratic control hands. And so what it means is that it means two things. One, nobody is going to get a slam dunk easily in these committees, and it's going to, I think, in most cases, drive policymaking towards a pragmatic, centrist, deal-making orientation, with the exception that you have certain members in the Senate. You know, we can name them if you want, but you know, Josh Hawley has put himself out there. You know, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, who become so ideologically committed to a position that they can be very disruptive, and they can have enormous power for that moment. You know, I remember, I mean, like, I was not a fan of John Bolton, you know, in 2004, 2005, when he was coming in. I've written more on John Bolton than anyone alive, I think. But one of the interesting things is, you know, I interviewed John Bolton recently, fascinated by his book, and we had a very cordial and interesting exchange. But, you know, he was interested in being Secretary of State. He was interested in any one of these other confirmable national security positions in the last Congress. But the administration knew it would never get past Rand Paul. So you can have, you know, someone standing out that can have that power. But I think in the long run in the Senate, they get surrounded and neutralized, if you will. But power sharing right now is going to be complex, and you have a fight over it right now over the filibuster and whether the Dems want to keep it, want to get rid of it. The thing is, I think the dance is a very interesting opening dance, where it really is not about the filibuster at all. It's about Mitch McConnell, who's had a lot of power, knows how to deploy power, sort of sees himself as the Republican LBJ lurking behind the scenes, enormous power. This is about, you know, a couple of alpha creatures basically trying to, you know, measure off against each other, and McConnell testing Schumer's resolve. And you have to understand, these guys have hardly spoken in the last couple of years. My friend Senator Joe Manchin is actually trying to get them to formalize a commitment to have a weekly coffee together, just to talk, even though they're going to have to talk. But they haven't been doing that for a long time, because McConnell, you know, has simply steamrolled things, and Schumer was extreme. Now the shoe's on the other foot. Power has shifted, and whether or not it's a 50-50 Senate, Kamala Harris, who will be doing no international travel for a while because she's got to be close for tie-breaking votes, is going to be spending a lot of time in her official office, her ceremonial office in Capitol Hill, and voting in this. So, you know, her ability to be there to break ties changes things. I think it throws us into the middle, but you have to understand that Josh Hawley, senator from Missouri out there, is willing to, you know, throw some hard fastballs, not only on the question of decertifying election, but on his commitment for the $2,000 you know, relief checks. You know, he's close in orientation and trying to position himself where Bernie Sanders is. So while Joe Manchin and Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins and others are talking about a new, you know, kind of, it reminds me one of, you know, John Breaux and Olympia Snow used to do this, where John McCain's, you know, Power 8 crowd, you know, to basically keep the Senate from veering too far right or too far left. There's always the possibility that a, you know, slightly uncomfortable bedfellow coalition of populists come in to play that same kind of role. We just don't know yet. I think that's a little less stable than the others, but it's going to be complex. I think the filibuster thing is just about the Dems saying, we don't want to necessarily get rid of the filibuster. We just want you not to be able to tell us what we're going to do. We have 51 votes to your 50. And that's what I think it's come down to.
You also raise a great point about when you're looking at the political dynamics, you always have to look to see who wants to run for president in 4 years, right? So that's
well, that's 4 years, but also, you got the midterm, 2022. So you got the House, but you're also going to have another big Senate, a third of the Senate runs. So whatever you do, the fragility, the positioning, senators coming in. So it's not just about 2024, it's positioning from 2022. And that is really what drove over 100 Republican House members, to sign on to that decertification effort, because, they're afraid of being primaried and they're already running for office, 2 years from now. But senators are in somewhat of the same bind, or at least 1/3 of that House is.
I'm just going to remind our audience members, please type your questions in the Q&A box and Terry will ask them. And while folks are doing that, one more question for me, and I think that's going to move us into the policy and the science realm. We were thrilled to see the elevation of the president's science advisor to cabinet level. And a group that we're part of, was recommending that. So we were delighted to see that. How does that impact the aura of science in Washington and in federal policy making?
I think it sends a huge, it sends a huge signal. Look, I have known a lot of science advisors to the president and science advisors to the Secretary of State. The first science advisor, Norm Newrider, to Colin Powell, I thought that sent a very powerful signal. And, one of the things that was always interesting to me in diplomacy is that we could go talk to bad countries like Cuba. I shouldn't call them bad countries, problematic countries, Cuba, North Korea, Iran, and we could have science delegations that could talk about various initiatives in a way that diplomats and national security types and even NGO types couldn't do. But the science community, there was something beyond politics that had to do with human welfare and the advancement of mankind, where that became a safe space. I remember Vaughn Turekian started something called Science and Diplomacy, magazine journal. I think I'm still on advisory board, but I'm not sure. If anybody's on there listening, let me know. But I think that was an interesting dimension. So raising that as an issue. But let's face it, even though I think Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, John Marburger was his science advisor, I knew quite well. While there were science advisors in the House, science always felt like this little boutique on the side that you had to have, but you hadn't fully embraced. It was sort of optional. Turn it on, turn it off. I think when you elevate OSTP and its director to a cabinet level position, a confirmed position, it changes the weight and consequence and gravitas, not only of that office, but of the field as a whole. So I think it's a huge jump, and I think it's going to be hard for future presidents to downgrade that role, because that would be such a slam on the concept of science and what it delivers that I think it's a huge step forward for mankind. And it's going to be hard to go back, which I look at that. This is one of the great structural achievements. But let me just put one caveat in there. It's one thing to elevate a role. It's another thing to basically embrace science and what it means and what it can deliver. I've always been, look, I know that you guys cover all sorts of science, NIH, and I think it's fun. I keep asking Francis Collins, thinks funding's going the right direction, more stable, blah, blah, blah. I look at the National Science Foundation, about $8 billion, $7.9 billion a year. It's pathetically small. And I'm like going, why isn't somebody coming out and saying, let's triple the NSF budget, like we used to talk about doubling the NIH budget? And I think that until you see money and dollars attached to science and initiatives and a kind of recreation and reaffirmation of the partnerships between universities and industry and labs and the policy community in a more robust way, rather than a way where we say it's all good, but it's really shrinking on a relative basis, so I think elevating science needs to be connected to a plan. And what I haven't seen is a genuine, robust plan yet. So I'll limit my enthusiasm with that element. So,
well, we have one that I'm gonna share with you after, but
okay, good.
But I want to open this up to questions from our audience, and it looks like we have a couple. Terry.
Yes, and just a reminder to folks, you can type your questions in the question box. First want to build on what you were talking about with the filibuster and the power sharing. You know, with McConnell demanding that the filibuster not be altered or he won't engage, what's the real likelihood for an agreement? Will we get one done?
You know, I believe, look, I mean, I could be wrong here, so I want to be very humble about this. I don't know what in Mitch McConnell's mind. I think right now, Mitch McConnell is trying to position and remind not only Democrats he's powerful, but his own caucus that he's powerful. Because what we saw in the last days of the Trump administration was the simultaneous challenge of air coming out of the Trump tires, where it was very clear he was no longer controlling his party as much. Remember, you got his first veto override, which was not a small deal. That was the first rebuke of the president, which included his own party on legislation. And it was a manifestation of air coming out of the Trump tires at the same time with what happened with regard to the Senate and what happened with challenging the electoral college votes. Was air is coming out of the tires of Mitch McConnell, people recognizing, in fact, that he was losing power. So I may be wrong, but what I think is going on is a shadow puppets game to some degree, where he's trying to hold out, but I think they will eventually come up with some sort of third way, some deal that gives him there, where they don't give up the filibuster, and McConnell finds a way to play along, but where he looks like he was heard and seen and assented to, is what I think it's going to go. So I don't think we're going to end up just with gridlock at the beginning, because McConnell knows he can't hold that. And by the way, have you been looking at these confirmation votes for Avril Haines, for Lloyd Austin, you know, despite the need for a waiver? They're overwhelmingly bipartisan. So that tension that was brewing for a long time, at least for this moment, Biden and the Democrats are in a bit of a honeymoon period. So look, I may be wrong. I mean, McConnell may play a harder hand than I think. I just think that this will not be a big deal in a week. Well, but I could be very, very wrong. I mean, I've been very, very, very wrong before, but I think it'll go away and they'll find a third way to kind of say, okay, Mitch, you're powerful, but we're not going to give up our rights to be who we are. And I think there's something out there. I haven't figured out what the deal will be, but so anyway, I'm rambling on, but I think it'll get solved.
Looks like we have a good question from our dear colleague Neil Lane.
Yes, Neil.
Deficits.
The large projected deficits. What is in store for non-defense discretionary spending? Big question on everyone's mind.
Neil, that is a really, really interesting question. The Republicans used to sort of be the party of fiscal responsibility and wanting to, balance budgets and, rein in entitlement commitments. But Donald Trump's last 4 years, you can ask whether he, created the kinds of cuts, but he left before COVID hit, $1.3 trillion additional deficit, particularly after his tax plan. So it's created this interesting question of who's going to be the responsible hand in terms of fiscal responsibility. And I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is that Joe Biden put a portrait, one of the portraits that he has put dead set, not just Cesar Chavez's bust behind on labor organizing, unions and all this, and asking Dolores Huerta, who helped organize with him, to come in and be part of the inauguration ceremonies, but a giant picture of FDR, right? I often thought that one of the things that Barack Obama missed in 2008, 2009, when he came into office, he didn't use that opportunity to rewire America's social contract, to begin looking at how do you deal with those people being left behind, neglected, who are victims, and figure out how do you kind of rebalance Wall Street with Main Street in various ways. That didn't happen. They bailed out Wall Street, kind of inched along in other ways, got back to kind of doing business in normal. That's my, Steve Clemons' view of it. But at the time, Joe Biden, in that circle of decision makers, got run over, because Joe Biden kept talking about, we need to do something to keep homeowners whole. We need to do something to kind of keep other folks whole. Jared Bernstein, who was now on Biden's economic team, was his senior economic advisor in the White House in 2009. So what's interesting to me about the question you said is that when you have a crisis of this size and scale, where they lay out and say climate, social justice, COVID, et cetera. They are arguing this is an FDR time. This is an FDR scale crisis that requires extraordinary whole of government, whole of weight, and whole of future spending commitment behind. So that means that you employ people like in the WPA through jobs projects that are going to be connected to clean energy. You're going to connect across the board. So in this moment, and I don't know when the expiration date is, there's going to be a vast amount of spending, rewiring and rebuilding infrastructure, science, all of that. And they're going to front load that as fast as possible while nobody can say you're overspending. So then there'll be an expiration date, Neil, and then we're going to have a big debate on, did they do it right? Did they do it wrong? Did they create recurring returns without recurring investment? Was it a good investment in the nation? Or did they just blow the bank? And now we're going to have inflation and incredible fiscal and monetary instability for a period of time. But I don't think in this near-term period, the debate and the tensions you asked, while they're going to be raised by some critics like Tom Cotton and others, they're not going to go anywhere in this time. This is Biden going to be FDR, and he's going to hit hard at anybody who isn't willing to kind of use this moment to fix the fundamental problems in the United States. But I don't know whether it's a year, I don't know whether it's 18 months. You will see the world change, and then the debate that you just talked about will become the dominant debate. Sorry to talk so long, but it's a great question.
No, great, thank you. Another question. First of all, this is an appreciation for your 23andMe poll idea, but you on something.
It was a weird idea.
Yeah, political divisions in particular are having a negative impact in the rare disease communities, and rhetoric is overshadowing science, resentment, fear, resulting in divisions. How this is going to have an impact on research recruitment because we're struggling to keep everyone in the fold. Any chance we see these partisan divisions getting smoothed over anytime soon?
I think partisan divisions are out there, but you asked two questions. One about partisan divisions and the divide in the country and all this. The other thing is I sort of feel like, all right, go back to 23andMe. What I realized and why I was one, along with my friend Michael Steele, when I was an MSNBC commenter in that election, I felt that the notion, the feeling that everyone had that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and it was being unquestioned. And if you did question it, you got a call from someone on the Clinton campaign that just berated you. There was a sort of built-in certainty. And whenever you see that, that's a very good reason why to look around. And so I did the 23andMe thing because I was an Air Force brat. My dad left Bartlesville, Oklahoma, when I was young. I had relatives in Kansas, Texas, and Oklahoma, Michigan, Kentucky, whom I don't know any of them. But genetics is interesting. You can kind of see this long list of people that you're in. So I began emailing them, say, hey, I'm on MSNBC. I may not, be your cup of tea, but would you be willing to let me talk to you? And so what this did is it gave me insights into how they think and see the world. I understand that the biggest driver in their mind, they saw kind of Hillary as a royal person, a queen returning to her castle, whatever, but they also saw themselves as having been patriots who had served over many generations in the military for America's American causes around the world, and that they had lost their jobs. They had, been hit by the 2008 financial crisis. They had been laid off as their jobs were sent to, offshore to the Philippines, to India, other places. And they felt they had fought the Cold War collectively in the aggregate, and that China had somehow come out as a winner. This was very palpable. And they felt that was there. So when you talk about the political divisions and what you do to deal with them in 23, I think it's vital that we figure out a way. You're not going to bring them all over. And I think Joe Biden knows this. I've talked to him about it before, is to go on a listening tour. These people need to be heard. They're in pain. They have had problems. You're not going to be able to fix them all, but they need to be heard and understand that they can register at some level and that they're still in the equation, not just being pushed under the rug. I don't think until that happens that the political divisions that you're talking about are going to be solved. And it creates this interesting challenge when science is involved. What happened during the Trump administration is science became a political football, and it should never have been. Science is designed to be something that helps and assists everyone. But there became a politicization of mask wearing of science, of scientists giving their best professional advice and opinion on how we should operate. And there is a distrust of that out there that is still lagging. And I really think that we need to go on a tour. And I've been very disappointed in the COVID rollout plan. I've been very disappointed in the absence of a communications plan that overtly talks about science, that overtly talks about, you know, they're incredible African-American scientists that have been fundamental to the leap-throughs in speeding up the process and identifying, you know, one of the key pathways on the vaccine. You know, there's all of the questions of inclusion, right? So what's inclusion about? Inclusion is about telling everybody where they may be that they were part of the solution. We haven't done that. And by the way, whether it's clinical trials, whether it's scientists, that we can give them a picture that shows some of this. That ought to be part of this plan, and it hasn't been. I was on a call last night. It was not a back and forth call, but hearing the administration talk off the record to a number of us journalists about COVID-19, about the prioritization, about reaching into vulnerable communities and communities of color and others out there. And if I could have asked a question, which I didn't get to, as I said, where are your ambassadors? Where are your people that are going into those communities that don't like you so that you can get over this? I'm in Chestertown, Maryland right now, rural Maryland, Eastern Shore. I have a house here, and I, you know, I don't think this is violating any public trust. 33% of our frontline police and fire people that deal, EMT folks, only a third of them are getting vaccines, and they're all on the front line. They can get it, they get it tomorrow. Why is it? Because here out in rural Maryland, there is a kind of distrust, and it is a challenge. And so I think that again, to go to the 23andMe and connection, we need to go to people we know we're talking to and figure out what are they feeling and hearing, and how can we move their needle so that they are taking steps in their own best interest where they trust. And I think we're failing on that right now, and we got to turn it around. So my apologies for going on so long. Great question.
Great answer,
Never
though.
need to apologize.
Yeah, lots of food for thought. Terry, I see I think a good related question. Perhaps you could ask that.
Yes, this question comes from Sandra. What do you think then is the most important thing the research community can do right now to leverage this COVID-related focus on science and ensure future support for research?
Look, I believe that every, so this is going to be pie in the sky stuff, and I apologize for just trying to dream up stuff that, you know, can't happen overnight. I'm an international affairs guy, national security guy. I've been doing it, think tanks, you know, writing my articles, interviews. I like to cover everything now. I kind of cover every issue in the world, but national security, I speak in World Affairs Councils in Dubuque, Iowa, Bartlesville, Oklahoma, Van Horn, Texas. You're going to go around, is to basically figure out in our communities, researchers and companies and entrepreneurs and disruptors and medical research centers are all over this country. You know, I have Brad Wenstrup, he's a conservative Republican. We're doing this program next week, by the way, the Hill, is called The Challenge of Our Times. And I have one of your board members, Michael Dolston of Pfizer, I'm going to be interviewing, but also Francis Collins of NIH and Anthony Fauci are all going to be in this program and talking about it. But part of it is, can I build in people who are frontline workers, who are basically, you know, in a biopharmaceutical firm in San Diego, who are all part of the ecosystem of having done this? And what I find missing is that the footprint all of you folks have is enormous. And yet I find that while all of you are self-aware of that, the question is, how can we amp this up? Can you, with your local college, liberal arts school, you know, public affairs schools, amp up, you know, who some of the heroes are that have talked about this time and what done? You know, we're living in a time where we're all on Zoom. You can get anybody to get on Zoom. I bet you could get Anthony Fauci, who's busier than hell, to say, you know, if there was a community in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that wanted to know about this and reach out, you know, if they went with a, you know, think that Anthony Fauci, can you tell us how this all worked and didn't work? I bet he would do it in a flash, because that's it. So I think that the answer is what the research community can do, in addition to doing great scientific research, which should be your primary responsibility, but in the other part of your brain that's out there, ask you, what alliances can I have, and suggest that folks that do organize, that do convene, that do online stuff, can I make myself available? Can I make other people available? Can you put together and convene audiences? Can you talk about folks so that they understand a little bit about how the investment in science is paying off? But I think there's another interesting dimension to this. Science is not a one-way street. You know, people think, oh, you get the science is also, it teaches people how to embrace and appreciate critical thinking. There can be wrong paths. Hydroxychloroquine, for instance, that Tony Fauci was talking about last night. You know, bad path, right? You can talk about things that work, things don't work, scientific method. Begin talking about failures, flops, things that don't work. Many of your big companies and pharmaceutical companies have invested billions of dollars. When I talk to Michael Dolston next week, he's going to talk about the fact that there was no guarantee that there was going to be a process. Pfizer basically put up a few $1 billion to begin this process, not knowing, in fact, whether it was going to get any of this stuff paid for at the time. But it seemed like those stories need to be told a little bit, and you can't just have one central place doing it. You're a diverse organization with folks all over the country. And so I would just recommend be creative or find somebody who's creative to try and get those stories told.
Thanks, Steve. Just such great food for thought. And we're doing some really great work.
I'm sure I'm irritating, people.
No, not at all. We're doing we're funding some really creative early career scientists to do community outreach. So I'll share that with you. But I wanted to pivot to climate. I mean, before the politicization of public health in the context of the COVID crisis, climate health has long been politicized. Our polls show, increased acceptance of the impact of climate change across parties. We've had the fires, et cetera. Do you think that we're at a time where we may be able to forge a bipartisan consensus on moving forward on climate?
I hope so, but I think it's going to be complicated. I'll say something that I often say when I'm unsure. I may disagree with what I'm about to say tomorrow, so I may change my view. I think it's great that John Kerry got appointed to be climate envoy, and he's changed his Twitter address to climate envoy now, or has a new thing out. He's going to be out there. The danger with envoys is it makes it look as if that one person handles that portfolio. It's not clear how this gets integrated across the board into the administration's plans and spending and whatnot. That said, Ron Klain, the president's chief of staff, the president himself, everyone I have talked to continues to talk about how social justice, equity, climate, these inequality issues are going to be foremost in the policy formulation and reformulation stages. So they're saying the right things to someone like me, who is a skeptic of creating a climate envoy on one hand and making, maybe it's what you do externally. And so, maybe I'm just too skeptical of these things. So on one hand, that is a good thing. Here's the problem. I think that, and I was talking to someone just yesterday, in fact, in one of these similar talks, and it had to do with a lot of people in the energy, renewables, but also oil and gas area, that what it is seeing happened across industry before Trump came in is that many steps in industry put themselves on a track to less and less carbons, looking at where their requirements are going to be. The incentives were moving more and more in a direction where renewables were going to be preferenced, but they're all uneven. Everybody has got a different design. But even with Trump rolling back regulations and requirements, they largely stayed on that track. That's a good thing. The bad thing is we have 1,000 different tracks that are being pursued on that front. And it's going to be very, very hard to, in the aggregate, look at how do you get to a consensus set of behaviors and frames and regulation in the end that gets us to the targets we need to be. And I'm not sure that we're able yet politically to make the jump to a more regulated or a harder hitting frame and scaffolding around climate, because we have let 1,000 flowers bloom in how to get there. So I could be wrong, but I think it's hard. And, also in a climate, where one of your big deal makers in the middle is going to be someone like Joe Manchin, who's just become chair of Energy and Public Works Committee. Joe is not anti climate change policies anymore. He's pro, but it comes with a lot of other caveats of what needs to be in that equation. And so the politics of this right now, John Barrasso will be ranking from Wyoming. Joe is going to be, of course, from West Virginia, coal industry and others, not wanting to walk away from those jobs. They're going to, be, an all of the above. I'm not sure all of the above continues to get where you need to be on climate health. So I guess I am impressed with the flag waving on climate that is coming in, rejoining the Paris Climate Accords, but I know instinctively in my gut it's not enough, and I don't think the political alignment is there to get more than where we need to be. Sorry to be depressing on that one.
It's good to hear, your realistic assessment. Do we have time do you have time, Steve, for one more question?
Oh, of course.
Okay, terrific. Terry?
Sure. Another question. Anything else you can tell us about what maybe might be in store for President Biden's first 100 days? What can we expect to come out of the White House?
Well, let's look at what they've already done. They've stopped spending on the wall. They've reversed the Muslim ban. They've rolled back, umpteen hundreds of measures on environmental deregulation. They've stopped oil and gas leases in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. They've done a lot. Schedule F, the politicization of civil service roles, they just rolled that back today. There is a 10-day plan, and it's exhausting. So, either at like 5:30 or 6:30 every night, they send out this thing. It's an off-the-record well, it's not off the record. It's an embargoed, on-the-record talk that we get to talk with the top people in the administration. And then by 5 a.m. the next morning, we can go public with anything they said. And this is happening every evening. And every evening, what they do is they give us this huge raft of stuff that they're going to do. I have to say it's an awkward thing for me. I have not written or communicated this much, but when Barack Obama was being shut down so much by John Boehner and McConnell and others in doing things, Barack Obama is the first president to really shift towards the use of executive orders as a way to govern. And I asked Senator Richard Blumenthal at that time if that was a challenge for democracy. And Blumenthal, of course, is a Democrat, so he had to critique his own president. He said, it's not healthy, it's not good for the country. We need to be careful of just having the executive branch have the power to govern this way. Well, we went through a kind of overuse of executive orders by Obama to Donald Trump turning them into reality shows, right? So at the beginning, there was great fanfare and he would have this on and big signing ceremonies and all this stuff going on. And now what's interesting is the Biden people, almost because they know, the speed at which they have to, I have mixed feelings about it. I think it's bad to do this, but because of what had been set up by them, their power right now is invested at this moment in executive orders and redoing or undoing what, wiping Trump's footprints off the face of America as much as they can is what they're trying to do as fast as they can on things like Muslim ban, on whatever, making the decisions on COVID and, Defense Production Authority and raising that up to a very high level. I think you're going to hear a lot more about Defense Production Authority, which came out yesterday with regards to amping up testing, supplies, other dimensions in vaccine production, but also PPE and coming along. But, you need Congress bail for this. So this is a long way of saying that I don't know what's coming next because I've been so flooded every day. He did 15 executive orders the first day, 10 I've lost track of days, but so that was Wednesday, Thursday, today's Friday. So he did 10 yesterday. I don't know how many of they've got lined up for today, but it's an enormous pile of things at each day. And so when Ron Klain wrote us all a note and said, in our first 10 days, we're going to turn the world upside down, that's hitting every dimension of civil justice, economic justice, reversing the, doing things from as diverse. I haven't even raised student loans. They want to ask that $10,000 and the principal of each person with student loans gets wiped out, that they suspend until the end of September student loan principal and interest payments. They're going till March 31st to impose the eviction moratoriums on rentals. There's just a huge number of things happening right now, so fast and comprehensive that at the end of the day, again, there's an expiration date when you have to move to that to begin talking to Congress to do things, which they are. They're basically saying we need a couple of $1 trillion in a COVID relief package that deal with all these other dimensions on top of what's been done. So that's what you're going to hear more about. And I'm sorry that I can't give you all of the specifics of what's coming up, but just know that it is a gusher every day right now.
Great. And building on that executive order question, one of the many executive orders that came from the previous administration had to do with immigration regarding student visa. Right.
Right.
Do you see a sense that is going to shift? Will we see a reopening of visa processing?
Absolutely. They've already begun to say it. So, they're latching it into both the immigration bill that they're sending up to Congress, that basically doing it. If you look at that, it's basically trying to create an ordered way to, figure out how we can get back to being a humane and decent magnet for the smartest people in the world again, but also people in need, people seeking asylum. They've been very clear and candid that they can't solve the border problems at the South overnight, and that folks, there's a caravan from Honduras trying to get up here, but looking at Joe Biden saying, hey, this is the moment, Jake Sullivan has said very clearly, this is not the moment. We need time. We're going to have to continue to develop ways to separate those that are credible from not. And what we will be is we will be humane, but it doesn't mean that this is the right time to think that people are going to get access. But that said, on the broad side, of the intellectual side, the side that I'll be, as part of this, we're doing another program next week called Reset. What are they? I've got Tom Donahue who's been pushing on, immigration reform to look at, how do you get back to bringing in smart, talented people in the country, scientists, engineers. And, I will, kind of share this one vignette where back in 2001, when Bob Gates was president of Texas A&M University, he and I wrote a couple of partnered articles in the New York Times that because of our shutdown then in 2001 of the borders to engineers, to students, to smart, talented people in science around the world, that it was going to really harm America, and that we needed, not only from the university perspective, but needed to continue to be the world's brain drain problem, if you will, that they had to, we had to keep this open. At that time, John Marburger was the president's science advisor, President Bush's science advisor. He completely agreed, and he was in the president's team. Craig Barrett, who was the CEO then of Intel, said, look, if we don't create a pathway for those people to be able to come to America, we will begin putting our R&D facilities out where they are. Boeing was saying, we will put if we can't bring people in to fly planes, we're going to put our training units and all that. We're going to begin hollowing out all of this capacity, R&D centers and whatnot in the United States, to deploy it abroad if we have to chase the talent there. And so I think now, some 20 years after, in which we've really, in my book, screwed up a lot of this, I think there's an understanding in the Biden team that this has to be turned around. And I think, and I hear from them, that they're going to move in that direction. I don't think the immigration bill covers all of that, but I do think they are going to begin processing visas again. And I think undoing the Muslim ban was part of that as well. I mean, they all think we need to open up America.
I think I am going to ask the last question. We've taken a lot of your time, Steve, and it's just been such a stimulating back and forth. We really haven't talked much about COVID-19, and certainly we're not going to get into great detail now, but it does appear that the new administration has assembled quite a team of people to try to get us onto that other side of the pandemic. What are your thoughts on how the administration is tackling the pandemic right now? And what can you share with us? Maybe to just give us some hope, and perhaps also for those of us on the phone who are in a position to be helpful, what can we do to help?
All right, I'll tell you two things. So I think on COVID-19, the administration is, I think, moving very fast. It's their number one priority of all priorities, is to beat and kill this and to turn this around. So they're doing lots of things that all of you already know. The mask mandate for 100 days and federal properties, asking other governors and other players to do that. So, that's a step forward, and there will be certain benefits that come from that. They've set up their COVID-19, I think it's called Advisory Council, but something, again, you saw Anthony Fauci yesterday, after his, talk about rejoining the World Health Organization. He looks 30 years younger. I mean, he looks a completely different person in the way he behaved, the way he postured, his smiling, and he basically confessed, look, I mean, it's a very different world. I don't have to fight Peter Navarro anymore. But there's a sense, I think, that they understand the scale of this. So they're talking about 100 million vaccines in 100 days. I think a lot of people are saying, why not more? And I think if they can get their feet on the ground, get greater deployment. So what was the problem before? Part of the problem before, in my book, if I were to read it, is that Jared Kushner and company had set up a command and control system rather than a just-in-time system. If you're going to trust industry, you're going to trust science and industry to produce. And we spent a ton of money in Operation Warp Speed to pre-purchase even if the item failed, right? So there's enormous product out there. And the question is, let's flow it out on a just-in-time basis and use it, as opposed to get and hold and hoard. And so there's a hoarding because there's a fear. And right now there is greater demand than supply, at least for this moment. But there'll be a point where those lines cross and we do it. I think that the thing you can do and weigh in on, it's something I'm weighing, it may sound minor, but it's actually a big deal, is that there's so much, we had law of the jungle in the PPE wars. We had Jared Kushner and the federal government competing against states and hospital systems over supplies. It was a horrible, horrible time. If you talk to Larry Hogan, the governor of Maryland, or anyone out there that basically had to go and buy online or compete, and they were competing against FEMA, you know, it was insane. So I think that's being fixed. I think Jeff Zients, who's sort of the Uber guy in this, is doing a good job from my best estimation of being able to do it. But I posed a question to them, which they have not answered, which I'm writing about next week, which is, if you look at the PPE side, which is different than vaccine, which we continue to need given what this is going on, is you have companies like 3M and whatnot, you know, just reaching these targets of production that are out there. So the supply that's needed is out there, and yet you still have shortages. Why is that? Well, it is that way because some hospital systems and some states are hoarding, and there's no transparency into the product once it's distributed into that level. And I think we need to have transparency in our distribution system so that people can relax, so that they can understand and trust, so they can see the flow. So there's a problem right now, I think, of replicating some of the bad aspects, because they keep saying this is going to get worse before it gets better. You need to go from a high fear system to a high trust system. And the only way you can do that, particularly with vaccines, testing products and supplies, and PPE, is to get a transparency in the last mile of distribution, because right now we don't have it. So that's one of the things that we need to stop the fear clutching up and sitting on product that's not getting to people.
Steve, we will look for that piece next week. What can I say? I mean, you always are so insightful and also bring a lot of content and history to your remarks. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I love talking to Research America.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody.
Bye-bye, Steve. It's really been terrific. Before our audience gets off the hook here, I just wanted to mention that we are very busy collecting evidence from researchers regarding the impact of the pandemic on non-COVID research. And that is what is going to help us really make the best case to the Hill and to the incoming administration about the need for additional supplemental research dollars. We are doing a roundtable with allied members next week, Alliance members, excuse me, next week. We're actually out of space, but we are definitely not out of room to hear your stories. We really want to hear your stories. So if you weren't able to register for the roundtable, please share your examples and anecdotes by emailing Sarah Chang. Terry has just put her email in the chat. The first week of February, we have 2 Alliance member meetings. We've got a slide up about one on February 4th for a discussion on key insights into America's views on science. We'll be hearing from Carrie Funk, who's the lead pollster at Pew, as well as Dr. Chris Volpe and our very own Mary Woolley, who will share our most recent public opinion polling on science. We also have a February 3rd panel on appropriations, budget, potential drug pricing landscape, and other issues, and we'll be sharing that with you. So on behalf of Research America, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and we will see you soon.